When the San Onofre nuclear power plant came online, it was seen as a clean and relatively cheap way of generating energy. But now, a small radiation leak has shut the plant down, and repairs could run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Public debate has focused on whether it would be safe to reopen the plant, but the operator and regulators are trying to decide whether it would be cost-effective.
It's not an issue of do we operate an unsafe plant. It's an issue of do we operate it at the level it has to be operated to be safe, or is it more cost-effective to shut it down? And that's a reasonable question to ask.
Murray Jennings worked at San Onofre in the 1980s and 90s as an engineer. He says it's not the first time there have been questions about the cost-effectiveness of keeping the plant's reactors running.
Oh no, Unit 1 went through this process in the late 90s. Unit 1 was an experimental reactor that was built here in the early 60s. It was operated through the 80s. It shut down in 92 for retrofit. It was down for several years in mothballs. Then we brought it back. We brought it back for a couple of years. And while bringing it back, the state made actually a lot of offers on tax incentives to shut it down permanently.
Jennings says that tax incentive played into the company's cost-benefit analysis of whether to keep the unit running. The California Public Utilities Commission is the agency that considers the cost-benefit to ratepayers. About 7 years ago, they agreed to let the operator, Southern California Edison, install new steam generators in hopes of extending the life of the plant.
One of the biggest issues before the Public Utilities Commission is whether ratepayers should continue to invest in aging nuclear reactors.
San Diego's utility company, SDG&E, owns 20% of San Onofre. Rochelle Becker, executive director of the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility, says back in 2005, SDG&E opposed Edison's plan to replace the steam generators.
They drew me a chart on the wall showing me how sleeving and tubing at the current reactors would allow this to operate till the end of its current life. They didn't think this investment was needed. The PUC and SCE leaned on them, and they bought in and walk lockstep now with the utility and with the Public Utilities Commission, and now their ratepayers are paying 20% of a non-operating plant.
Becker says the cost-benefit analysis is changing now that the new $700 million steam generators need repairs. And she says that's not the only new cost threatening the plant.
I would call it the $64 million question, and that is exactly what Edison and SDG&E customers are paying for the new seismic studies, $64 million.
There are signs Southern California Edison may be trying to cut its losses on Unit 3. The company has removed the nuclear fuel from the reactor, and it's also announced it will lay off more than 700 employees. One question to consider before looking at decommissioning is what is the state of the plant's decommissioning fund? 2011 is the last time that regulators looked at that, and they estimated it would cost $3.7 billion to decommission all 3 units. At that time, Edison and SDG&E had collected about $3.5 billion, although there is some question about whether the stock market could have eroded that.
Maybe there isn't enough money in that pot. We just don't know it, but it's another one of those pots that need to be on the table to discuss whether or not we're ready to phase these reactors down.
Now, if they decide that it's more expensive to fix it than the return is worth, then they probably won't bring it back.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think they're going to operate. And the reason I think they're going to operate is they're very strong sources of power. They'll probably be somewhere around 1,000 megawatts each, or maybe a little less. But that's still quite a bit of the load in San Diego and LA. And at that load, well, they generate a lot of money. They generate a lot of income, so it's worth putting money into them. And they have another 25, 30 years of life in the units.
Jennings thinks the decision about what to do at San Onofre will be made before the end of the year.